you're constantly exposed to the troubles of existence, and they're real troubles, And I mean, it's not unique to clinicians. You see that with physicians and palliative care workers and people who work in morgues and emergency responders. And like, there's lots of people who face the very difficult aspects of life very frequently. You detach yourself from it to some degree, and I don't mean in a disinterested way. I mean in a way that is sort of allied with a longer term view. Like if I'm doing an interview now with someone who's attacking me, and I can get irritable. I think I was too irritable in the GQ interview, for example, which some of you might have watched. I think, well, I'm not going to jump to conclusions about how this is going to go, even with regards to how it feels right in the moment. We'll see how it unfolds across time. And I'll try to manage myself in the moment with the least amount of upset that I can manage. And it's part of the doctrine of minimal necessary force. Like, one of the things I've learned, if you have a dispute with someone and it needs to be settled, and maybe they need to change more than you, and that's not always the case, because sometimes the settling requires change on your part. But let's say that they have to be defeated in some sense in comparison to you. You don't want to defeat them any more than necessary. It's like, you don't knock your opponent to the ground and then jump up and down on them 3 or 4 times in triumph. You pin them and then let them up. Minimal necessary force, because any more than that just produces a counter reaction. And I guess the other thing is my motivation when I'm engaged, let's say, in these discussions, is that I'm not trying to win the argument. I'm not trying to win. I'm trying to say what I think as clearly as I can. And there might be an element, one of the consequences of that might be what appears to be a victory, but the right victory is the victory for your ability to articulate what you believe. And that's what I'm trying to do. And so that's another reason to stay composed, is like, well, okay, this person has just thrown a curveball at me. It's like, all right, so, well, I could be thinking, well, I don't want to be undermined by that, and I don't want to make a fool of myself, and I don't want to be put on the spot. And of course, all of those things are true. But mostly what I'm thinking about is, okay, well, now I've got that question. I want to answer as truthfully as I possibly can. What do I think about what was just said? And I'm not calculating the outcome. I'm assuming this is a mark of faith, right? This is the faith that people have talked about being something that has to be manifested necessarily. We've been talking about this since the dawn of time. What's the faith? The faith is that if you say what you believe to be true, then whatever happens is the best thing that could have happened. And I believe that. So that's what I really believe it. Partly because I believe that if you're deceitful, which is the opposite of that, or manipulative or malicious or malevolent, but maybe primarily manipulative, then what you're acting out is your belief that deceit will bring victory. And I just don't believe that at all. I think it's a preposterous claim. And so if deceit won't bring victory, then truth is what brings victory, if there is such a thing as truth. And there's certainly such a thing as deceit. So there must be such a thing as truth. And some of it's just curiosity too. It's like, well, I'm going to say what I think and see what happens. And that's an adventure. That's the adventure of your life, really. And you don't want to miss that, because that's what you've got in your life, is for it to be an adventure. It's not an easy road, it's a stormy sea. And what you have is the adventure of contending with God in the waves. That's what you have. And The way you do that is with truth. And then that sort of takes you out of the immediacy of the conflict, whoever it is that the conflict with whoever it is that you're talking to. You're trying to ally yourself with something that's deeper and more profound and more lasting. But I don't think that I am particularly consistently composed and confident. I think I have faith in the truth. It's not the same thing. And, I'm an emotional person, obviously. How do you manage to read so much? Well, a lot of that's good fortune. I seem to have a knack for reading. It was a gift. When I was a kid, if I look at a word once, I can always spell it. I have it instantly. And I've been like that ever since I was little. And so I seem to have a facility for very rapid verbal comprehension. And then my father taught me to read when I was very young. And I think it was the combination of those two things that enabled that for me. I had a natural proclivity, a verbal ability. My graduate supervisor, very smart guy, Robert Peel, guy I really liked, he had trouble with spelling. I don't know why exactly that is. People have different talents, and I had a talent for immediate recognition and memory of words, and I'm also very verbally fluent. Give me a sec here. So I think mostly it's an innate talent. Now I also do know that the more you read, generally speaking, the faster you get. My wife has really, she always read, but she's really started to read a lot since she got a Kindle. Turns out she really likes her Kindle. She reads a lot more, and her reading speed has increased a lot. A lot of it's practice. You can try to speed up your reading by reading a little faster than you're comfortable with. I don't know the research literature indicating the utility of that, but practice is always useful. The other thing is that you want to make it part of a habit, both conceptually and practically. A lot of people don't read because they're afraid of books. The books aren't their friend. So you might want to get a few books and kind of make them your friend. You can start with simpler books, like fiction. There's lots of good fiction written for adolescents and children. It's pretty straightforward. You can start there. If you're interested in philosophy, there's lots of simple guides like The Idiot's Guide to different topics, or a beginner's guide. I read those things all the time when I'm first investigating a new topic. I start with the introductory material. And I make time for reading, and that was encouraged in my family. I always read before I went to sleep. I read, and I still do that. Somewhat less so because I've become so distracted by social media. But you set aside a bit of time every day to read. And for me, it was always just before I went to bed. I go to bed, turn on the light, and read when I was a kid, for hours. And if you do something every day, you do a lot of it. And so I would say, well, if you want to read, if you want to make yourself educated, just put aside 20 minutes a day to read, or 10, some small amount of time that you could actually steal, not 2 hours, because good luck, man. It's very unlikely you'll manage that. But 20 minutes a day, that's 2 hours a week. That's 700 hours a year. That's, even if you're a slow reader, that's a good number of books. And so you make it a habitual part of your life, and you decide that it's going to be something that you value. You investigate carefully what resistances you might have to that idea, because you might think, well, that's pseudo-intellectual, or there's something more productive I could be doing, or I'm intimidated by books, or I hate books because I wasn't good at reading when I was a kid and was humiliated because of it, or you've got something against intellectuals, or God, there might all sorts of resistances to picking up a book. And then you could listen to audiobooks. That's a good way around that, by hook or by crook, man. So you value it, you make it a regular part of your life, you practice doing it. And you need a higher goal too. Is like, well, why should you read? Well, it's so that you're more informed and you can think better. Well, why should you be more informed and think better? Because you won't walk blindly into so many pits. You'll be able to negotiate better in your life because you'll be more informed and more verbally fluent, and you'll have a better sense of how the world works, and be able to hold your own in conversations, and that'll make you more confident. Those are all unbelievably good reasons. To be highly literate is an incredibly massive advantage, practical advantage, and it shouldn't be underestimated. So there are many drug addicted and mentally ill homeless people in my city, and it seems to keep getting worse. How do we help people who don't want to be helped? Well, I think you do that by example, fundamentally. There isn't any other way I know of to help people who don't want to be helped. And then I guess I think what you do is you open up, it's the same thing I've said many times, is that you do what you can to make the things around you better, your family better, and then whatever you can manage in your community. If you're interested in the drug addicted and the mentally ill, there are you could volunteer. You could talk to those people and listen, because then you'd find out what the hell their problems are. And then you'd have some sense about how they might be helped. But that's a hard thing. There's no helping from above. Drug addiction and its combination with mental illness, unbelievably complicated problems. There's no simple solutions. So, and it isn't even necessarily obvious that the people that you see who are homeless and drug addicted and mentally ill don't want to be helped. Is that sometimes they have problems that are so absolutely overwhelming that they can't be helped in any real sense. Like if they're unmedicated schizophrenic, for example, with a drug problem, that's just a nightmarish. It's a nightmare of insane complexity, because schizophrenia is very, very difficult to deal with, even with medication, because the medication that helps people who are schizophrenic also tends to depress their positive emotion and decrease their motivation. So the medications are generally helpful, and the proper treatment guidelines, if you're schizophrenic, generally are stay with your medication, because despite the negative consequences of the medication, which aren't trivial, the consequences of not taking it are worse. And that's a real Hobson's choice, right? It's a bit of hell in both directions. But if you really want to know, I would say go have some contact with those people and listen to them and learn what the problems are. And maybe you could start seeing what might be helpful. It's a really complicated problem. And it's different than the problem of helping people who don't want to be helped, because you have to figure out who it is that doesn't want to be helped first. And you don't want to assume that just because someone's homeless that they don't want to be helped. I mean, that doesn't mean that it's easy to figure out how to help them. It's not easy. Helping people is a very difficult business, and it's a very dangerous business too, because you get tangled up in ways that you wouldn't expect. And that can be an occupational hazard, let's put it that way. How do I stop ruminating? These thoughts are recurring and relate to every and any embarrassing moment I have ever had during my lifetime. I'm a 76-year-old woman. Well, here's something you could try. Write down everything that you're ruminating about. I know that seems counterproductive, but ruminations come up accidentally, involuntarily, unconsciously. Whereas if you write down everything that you're ruminating about, you're facing them voluntarily. So I would say, open up a journal or a Word document, whatever, and write down every time you ruminate about something, write it down, and write down every rumination you can remember exhaustively. Write them all down. That would be the first thing. And the second thing is standard behavioral therapy practice. The next thing would be write down why you think they happened so that you get a good causal account. And then write down, well, what you might have done about them then, but more importantly, what you could do about them in the future to avoid that. Because it doesn't matter that something embarrassing happened to you once. What matters is whether or not you're likely to repeat it in the future. But my suspicions are that even if you could just start simply. Write down every ruminating thought that you have voluntarily and think about them in detail and write them down in detail. Get every little word down. And then you have that document. And then when you have a thought and start to ruminate on it, then sit down later after the ruminating thought goes away and bring it to mind voluntarily. So every time you have a thought you don't want to have, later practice having that thought on purpose. And try that for about a month and see what happens. Because it's often the case that if you start thinking about the thoughts you're ruminating on consciously and confront them voluntarily, that they will start to go away. So you could try that. You could try that. That should help. What's the best method to retain what you read and to be able to use it in conversation? Oh, well, it's very difficult really to retain anything without recalling it. So look, if you encounter something and then you encounter it again, you can usually recognize that you've encountered it before. That's recognition memory. So it's an important form of memory. It's the memory that's associated with familiarity, but it's not the same as being able to use something exactly. It's a rather shallow form of memory, even though it's necessary. In order to be able to use something, you have to recall it. And this is also a very useful hint for studying. Like if you're studying and you have to remember, what you want to do is study, and then you want to write down what you just learned. So you read a paragraph, you close the book, and you write down what you remember. Or you read a chapter and you close the book and you write down what you remembered. Or at least you sit there and you try to remember, because the way you remember is by practicing remembering. Okay, so if you're reading and you want to use it in conversation, then you have to think about what you read. You have to put it in your own words. It's often helpful to close the book and write it down, or to associate it with some problem that you're currently trying to solve. You have to take the knowledge and make it your own. And then that alters the structure through which you look at the world, and that changes the way that you think, so that when you have a conversation the next time, that you're going to have the conversation in a different way. So merely reading isn't enough. You have to read and think and recall. And it's the act of recalling that produces the remembering, and it's that act of remembering that puts that material at hand for you. So okay, well, look, I'm just about done here. It's 11:35, so I've gone for 19 minutes, and I hear people rattling around upstairs, and I have to fly to Zurich today, and so I'm going to stop out. I'm going to stop here, so I'll find one more question and answer it, and then I just found out I'm having a girl. Congratulations. What can I do to raise her to think for herself and not fall into the modes of thinking proposed by popular culture? Well, you can let her think for herself when she's a kid. You know, what you do is so that she practices doing that, and so that means to consciously encourage as much autonomy as possible. So how do you do that? Well, let's say she's a little kid, she's 3, and she starts to get interested in clothing. So you lay clothing out on the bed and you say, well, you can wear this or you can wear this. You let her make autonomous decisions. And with kids, you don't want to let them choose from an infinite menu. You want to give them a constrained menu. But what you want to do with your daughter is allow her to make as many decisions as she can possibly make as early as possible. And that doesn't mean that children always know what's best for themselves or any nonsense like that. It just means that you're going to encourage her autonomy in every measure that you can manage. And that means you're going to have to be brave and allow her to subject herself to a certain number of risks. So you raise her to think for herself by letting her think for herself. And that can start quite early. I would say when she's a teenager, she's going to fall into the modes of thinking proposed by popular culture because that's part of being enculturated and socialized. It's virtually inevitable, and it's even somewhat desirable. But what you hope is that you've encouraged the capacity for autonomous thinking to a sufficient degree that it's likely to integrate with that more intense teenage socialization and then reemerge, so you get someone who comes out the other side as an autonomous individual. And that works with boys and girls. So I guess you do what Geppetto did in Pinocchio. Is the first thing you decide is, well, you don't want to raise a puppet. You want to raise an autonomous person. And then you think through, well, what does it mean to be an autonomous person? What sort of person do you want your child to be? What sort of person do you want to encourage your child to be? And then having established that vision in mind, that's going to guide your choices. But at least you're making the right choices. You don't want someone who's dependent and whiny and cringy and more frightened than they need to be, and martyr-like and vengeful and malicious and manipulative and mendacious, all of those things. You want someone who can make their own judgments. And you can ask kids what they think pretty damn early. Like, you have to be careful and not push them beyond their capacity. But if you know your child, you'll be able to see what level of decision-making they're capable of engaging in. And then you would encourage them to mature as rapidly as they can. And that also means that you have to not allow yourself to fall too in love with the dependent and needy creature that your infant will be to fulfill your own emotional needs. You want to detach and encourage to mature as rapidly and as comprehensively as possible. And that will work. And some of that is negotiation with your child. You find out what they think. It's like, what do you think about this? What do you think about who should do the work in the house? How should we split it up? Like, they can be engaged in the decision-making process at a very early age. And part of that encouragement is going to be reflected in your implicit attitude that the child is a real person who's capable of imposing their will in a realistic sense in the world, on the world, and doing that in a competent and competent and confident manner. So, but at least the beginning is the desire to do that. You want to raise a confident, autonomous, courageous, truthful person. And then you reward them when they're like that. And you notice it and you tell them, good work. You did that right. Keep it up. That's the right thing. And you tell them why, what they did was right, in a detailed way. And that's very powerful. You wait and you lurk and you wait for something that you want to have happen. And you say, yes, well, we'd like to see a lot more of that. Good work. You do that with yourself and with your partner too. It's a very powerful technique. All right, everyone, I'm going to say goodbye. Hopefully I'll do another one of these in February, although I'm not certain. Maybe at the end of January. I have a couple of days there, but I'm going to Australia in February, and that's going to be very busy. So, but maybe I like doing these. Maybe I can do another one in January near the end. Um, so, just one last thing. I just want to let everybody know, remind everybody that I am leaving Patreon on the 15th of January. And so, thanks for your support over the last couple of years. And hopefully my next book will be better than the last one was. That's the plan. I'm doing my best to manage that. And hopefully we'll all have a good year, and aim high and all of that. So good to see you. And we'll talk in something approximating a month. Bye-bye.